Good morning. I wonder where you are as you listen to my voice. I was very intrigued the other week when I talked to one of our listeners who said, Richard, if I listen to the whole of your program, I'm late. I said, why? Well, I stay in bed to listen. Well, you don't have to stay in bed to listen. Take the radio with you and you can start working in the bathroom. I'll keep talking. I won't stop. If you're going into work, just be careful. Some of those roads are difficult. Now, we've got two very fascinating subjects. We're with Jesus in Jerusalem. He's just about at the point of the trials and the cross. And at this particular time, he's in the temple teaching, and different parts of the Jewish authorities are coming to him, and they're questioning him, and they're asking him all sorts of different things. Now, the first question is about marriage, and it's in Mark 12:18. It says, "Then the Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to Jesus with a question. 'Teacher,' they said, 'Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies and leaves a wife but no children, the man must marry the widow and have children for his brother. Now there are 7 brothers. The first one married and died without leaving any children. The second one married the widow, but he also died leaving no child. It was the same for the third. In fact, none of the 7 left any children. Last of all, the woman died too. At the resurrection, whose wife will she be, since the 7 were married to her?' Jesus replied, 'Are you not in error because you do not know the Scriptures or the power of God? When the dead rise, they will neither marry nor be given in marriage. They will be like the angels in heaven.' Now, about the dead rising, have you not read in the book of Moses, in the account of the bush, how God said to him, 'I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob'? He's not the God of the dead, but of the living. You're badly mistaken." Now, as you listen to my voice, let's start off here. If you've got a wonderful marriage, you'll be shocked to know that you're not going to be married in heaven. If you're struggling in your marriage, you may be somewhat relieved to know that you're not going to be married in heaven. If you're a single, you may just say hallelujah and go on. But all 3 of you have got a little problem, says Jesus, because you are. Now let's come back at it this way. If you have a wonderful marriage and you're really blessed in your marriage, know this, that when you get to heaven, the blessings will be equally great. Your happiness will be far greater than it is here, and all that you've received here through your marriage will be supplied in heaven by the Lord your God. We cannot understand the state of living once we're with the Lord our God, because all we know is what we've got here. And so we try to apply that to heaven, and it doesn't seem to work out. Now, the particular example that the Sadducees brought may have been real, or they may have just made it up. But notice the way Jesus comes back at them. They wanted to know whose wife she'd be at the resurrection. Well, Jesus says, you're just not thinking straight. There isn't marriage in heaven. And I have a feeling, and I can't work this out for you, that we don't even have a sex in heaven. I don't think we're either male or female, because we're told that there's neither male nor female with our God. So we can't understand the state that we'll find ourselves in. Jesus says to them, when the dead rise, they will neither marry nor be given in marriage, but they will be like the angels in heaven. Now, there's no indication that the angels in heaven don't have a good time, that they don't enjoy themselves, that there isn't an unspeakable joy for them. So if that's true for them, it's going to be true for us. We simply can't conceive the type of life we'll have and the sort of state we'll be in. But Jesus says something else that I want you to hear. Right at the end, he talks about God being the God of the dead and the God of the living. Now, if the Lord your God is your closest friend here through Jesus Christ, know that he'll continue to be that after you've died. What Jesus is saying is, the relationship you have with your Lord here is the relationship you're going to continue to have, only of course it's going to be a lot better. Understand this. He says that he was the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. In a very real sense, he was the friend of these men. So after death, he continued to be their friend, because God is not stopped by death. We are, and it becomes an issue. but it's never an issue with the Lord our God. It just flows right on. So whatever you're doing now, however close you are to Jesus now, that's going to continue through death and to the other side of death. That is a tremendous comfort. Now then another question comes. This time it's the teachers of the law, the Pharisees, came and heard them debating. Nothing that Jesus had given them a good answer. He asked them, of all the commandments, which is the most important? The most important one, they answered, is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one God. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. The second is like unto it. Love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. Well said, teacher, the man replied. You're right in saying that God is one, and there is no other but him. To love him with all your heart and with all your understanding, with all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself is more important than all burnt offerings and sacrifices. When Jesus saw that he had answered them wisely, he said to them, You're not far from the kingdom of God. And from then on, no one dared ask Jesus any more questions. Now, if you remember, in Matthew's Gospel, it's put in a rather different way. They came to Jesus and said, Which is the great commandment? Now, the reply is the same. The greatest commandment is love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind and strength and understanding. What is Jesus saying? What is the real crunch of this teaching? Simply this. The loving of God is first, basic, and it must always be first. That is the basis on which Christian faith is built. We need a love for God. Now, if we're going to love God, we're going to have to spend time with him. Because if we don't know him, we're not going to love him. If we don't know him, we're not going to trust him. We've got to spend time with the Lord our God. That's number one. But understand also what I've just said. It is the absolute basis. It is the basic fact of our Christian faith. To love God with your whole being. Now, everything else flows from that. And so Jesus says, then you love your neighbor as yourself. In other words, you're not going to love yourself in the right sense. You're not going to love your neighbor in the right sense until first that you love the Lord your God. Now, for me, and this may not be true for you, I have to love God as I picture him in Jesus Christ. I personally cannot picture God without Jesus. Now, that may be my particular hang-up. I accept that. I understand that. You God. I'm not sure what you picture, because the Bible tells me that God is a spirit, and I'm not sure how you picture a spirit. But the love part, we've got to understand. We've got to build on this, because it's such an essential teaching. My whole being, my whole character, my whole personality has to be consumed with loving the Lord my God. Then I've got to know him. And it comes back to what I've shared with you a number of times on this program. It almost seems like a circle of events. We have got to get to know God in a very real sense. How can I know God? Well, let's go back to the words of Paul. He says, I've given up everything to know Jesus. Everything. He's given up ambition. He's given up his future. He's given up his money. He's given up everything to know Jesus. He says, I count everything as refuse. What for? To know Jesus, to know Jesus, to know Jesus. That's how we come to know God. When I know Jesus Christ in all his fullness, then I know God. Now, is that true for you? Are you spending your life, are you spending your time, are you giving your energies to knowing Jesus, to knowing Jesus, to knowing Jesus? That's the key to loving the Lord your God. Spend time with him. Become his friend. Bring him on board. Christ is my life. Now, as that's true, then what Jesus says in this passage in Mark 12 and verse 28 becomes true. Yes, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. Now, having done that, I can begin to love my neighbor as myself. But remember the second part of that one. Love yourself, not with a selfish love. But you see, if you recognize that you are the created being of the Lord your God, if you recognize that Jesus Christ lives within you, then you do love yourself. You don't put yourself down because you are what you are because of Christ. And some Christians spend all their time putting themselves down. I'm no good. I'm nothing. That's not true. You are something in Christ. And you need to see that you love yourself. Now you can love your neighbor. And you love your neighbor as you love yourself. You let that love flow. So what happens? I begin to know the Lord my God through Jesus Christ. And then I begin to love. And as that love builds up, that love flows out from me. And it flows out to other people. It's become real in my life. And they feel the touch of the love. Now you go back to 1 Corinthians 13 and begin to read that chapter on love. And what does Paul say? He says, unless you've got love, you can have all the faith. You can give away every penny you've got. You can even have your body burned. You amount to absolutely nothing at all. Why? Because our value in the Christian life, our value to other people in eternity, all comes from love. It's the love that's flowing through us, out to others, that's really the vital part. Now, what love is flowing through you? Have you started with that basis? Have you started with that premise? Loving the Lord your God with your whole personality. Fine. Now let that flow out. Constantly, continually. Let it build up as you know him better, increasing all the time, consuming your very being. And you know and I know that when you come up against a loving person like that, it's the most marvelous benediction of your life. You suddenly feel the touch of the love of the Lord. And it's not the individual, it's flowing through them to you. They've got the priorities straight. Here is the basis for everything. And by the way, take these 2 commandments, read over the 10 commandments in Exodus 20, and you will find if you keep these 2, loving God, loving your neighbor as yourself, you cannot break any of the 10 commandments. It is simply impossible, but it all comes from love that's within, instead of a law that's outside you. And that makes a tremendous difference.